Hello everyone, and welcome to Simulating Manufacturing for Suppliers. My name is Eric Oswald, and I'm a Senior Technical Consultant at aPriori. I'm joined by Anthony Jafrida, Manager of North American Implementation Services. This technology showcase will consist of a 10-minute demonstration and 5 minutes of questions and answers. We plan to run this session 4 times consecutively so you can attend multiple demonstrations in the hour. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. The attendee lines will be on mute throughout the session. We'll be recording the session and it will be available on the website within 24 hours. We will utilize the chat panel for questions, which will be brought forth by the moderator at the end of the session. You can also feel free to schedule time with me. My name is Eric Oswald. So let's begin. As a supplier, the main goal is to grow the business. To grow the business, you need to win bids and maintain margins. Winning bids requires you to respond to RFQs and stay competitive to achieve or exceed the desired win rate. Maintaining margins requires you to understand the should cost during estimation and leveraging that information when the job is before. So, what if you could utilize CAD in order to help automate your estimation process? What if you could evaluate alternative routings in order to determine the most competitive option? What if you can identify opportunities to purchase new equipment to optimize the build process? And what if you could utilize the estimate information during production planning? With that in mind, I'm going to show you how to quickly generate an estimate within aPriori. So I have imported this CAD model into aPriori and defined a few inputs. So I've defined the process group, the digital factory for production, the material and production information. I have also tagged this scenario with the opportunity number that can be referenced at a later time. So each digital factory will have its own assumptions associated with it and default behavior. So each digital factory will have materials. So we'll have different material compositions and the associated cost per pound. Now, as a user, I do have some control. If I understand I need to expedite material for this bid package, I can override the material here. I can also determine what additional secondary processes are required for this part during production. So if I wanted to add an anodize, I could do that in this window here. Now, moving on to the routings, each digital factory has specific routings associated with it. By default, aPriori will evaluate each routing for feasibility and determine the cost for each feasible routing. Now, aPriori by default will select the most competitive option. But if as a user, I understand there's capacity restraints due to machine outages or things of that nature, I can also select the routing I would like and have aPriori only evaluate that routing. Now, once aPriori finishes costing, I'm going to show you the different routings that it has evaluated. So coming back to this routing window, I can see aPriori has evaluated many routings, and it has determined that the 3-axis and 4-axis mill are both feasible options. Now, the 4-axis mill routing we can see is about 35 cents or $35 less than the 3-axis mill routing and is the most competitive option. Now, I understand that there may be times that we want to evaluate multiple parts within a bid package, and we also may want to evaluate multiple variations of those parts within that bid package. I can achieve that by performing bulk costing. So within this analysis, I have a bid package of 5 parts, and I want to evaluate my 2 manufacturing sites for each of these parts. Once I've determined all of the same inputs as I did in the previous example, I can go ahead and hit the cost button. Once I hit the cost button, aPriori will then process these parts within batch. Once the parts finish costing, I can then go to Cost Insight Report in order to see which factory is the most competitive for this given bid package. So I'm going to switch over to Cost Insight Report. In cost insight report, I have a specific report that outlines each scenario and the cost for each one, and I can compare them side by side in this bar chart. So as I can see, in this given bid package, manufacturing site 1 is the most competitive option for just about every part. The last part on the right, both sites are relatively competitive compared to each other. Now, before I respond to this RFQ, I would want to then go and see the capacity required for the bid package of both sites. So going to a different report, I can see that the capacity required for each batch of manufacturing site 1 and manufacturing site 2. So manufacturing site 1 would require 96 hours total, 35 on the 3-axis mill, around 58 on the 4, and around 3.5 on the bandsaw. Now, manufacturing site 2 was the least competitive option of these two sites and requires about double the time required from total machining required, as well as almost double on the 3-axis mill and just under triple on the 4-axis mill. Now, at this point, I can cross-reference the capacity required for this batch to my actual capacity of my actual factory. Now, we can also take this a step further and look at what would other competitors potentially be bidding on this same package. In order to do that, I'm going to compare each scenario produced to a scenario with aPriori USA, so a factory that has machines that are not in my current factory. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And now I can see on the right, this part, aPriori USA in red. Actually, both of my factories are relatively competitive in the marketplace. Now, on the left side, I can see that manufacturing site 1 is relatively competitive in comparison to the marketplace as well. But the other scenarios were not as competitive. To dig a bit deeper, I'm going to go to a scenario comparison report, and I'm going to look at the scenario with the most cost associated with it. So opening up the scenario comparison report, I have my 3 different scenarios with my 3 different digital factories. And I could review the cost for each factory. Now, looking a little deeper, I noticed that the routing of both of my factories have a 3-axis mill, yet aPriori USA is being produced with a 5-axis mill. So a 5-axis mill is a machine that has more degrees of freedom than the 3-axis mill and is typically used for more complex parts. So knowing this, I can then start an investigation to see if it may be opportunistic in order to purchase this equipment in order to respond to my bid package. Now, this is a machining example, but the same thing applies for other process groups. So another example in sheet metal, if my factory is set up with laser cut machines, there may be a bid package where it's actually more competitive to have a turret press machine. And in that same instance, I can then invest if the capital is worth investing in order to respond to a specific opportunity. So as I just demonstrated, it is possible with aPriori to utilize CAD in order to help automate my estimation process, evaluate multiple routings to determine the most competitive option, identify opportunities of purchasing new equipment to optimize my build process, and I could utilize the information in my estimate during production planning. Oops. So at this time, I'd like to take a couple of moments to respond to some of your questions. The QA panel is still open, so there's still time to answer your questions via the chat. Anthony, do we have any questions?
No questions in the chat yet. If anyone has any questions, please enter them in the chat. One question I had, you showed the quote reference in the cost guide, would customers be able to add their own fields to the cost guide based on how they would like to track and report on data in the future?
Yes. Can everyone see my aPriori screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, to add additional tags, and it's really good to add tags to the data in order to be able to leverage it in a meaningful manner in Cost Insight Report. To add them, you would go to System Admin Toolset, System Administrator, and User Defined Attributes. Then within here, I can add as many attributes as I'd like, and you can make them searchable and things like that.
Great.
Any other brain busters?
Can aPriori data be integrated into my PLM or ERP systems?
So yeah, aPriori data can be integrated into other systems. And it's typical to have them integrated utilizing our reporting database. So systems that we've integrated with our CPQ tools, ERP, but how the system is integrated is really dependent on the system that you have.
And then the last one for me, you showed bulk costing. Can you just explain for everyone how that's licensed, and if they're interested in understanding if they have access to bulk costing, how they can do that?
Yep. So bulk costing is licensed separately. You can ask your aPriori administrator if you're licensed to it. You can also see within the main screen in your help window. So if I go to help, view license, it'll come up with everything that you're licensed for, and this bulk loader would be that bulk costing. So one additional item, so like bulk costing can be a very powerful tool if it's leveraged strategically and effectively. So definitely look into that if you are not licensed, I would say.
Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. If anyone has any, please just enter those in the chat. Otherwise, we'll pause here and wait for some other folks to join for the next session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and please feel free to go look at other sessions within this tech showcase. Thank you. Have a nice day.